Okay, we're going to take a look now at chapter 10. This is a chapter with a tremendous amount of detail. I would recommend that you maybe make some bullet points of just the plot here, just because it's basically a story within a story. We are going to find out what Dr. Manette's letter says. And Dr. Manette's letter is going to tell us why he was in prison and what happened with the family that sent him there. It's also the climax of the book, so I think that's an important thing to recognize. So as the letter is read to the court, so remember, this is the letter that they found, Monsieur Defarge found hidden up in the chimney behind a loose stone. And Dr. Manette basically is writing his story of captivity. So he says that these words are formed by the rusty point, like a rusty iron point that he has found in his prison. And his ink is scrapings of soot and charcoal from the chimney mixed with blood. The detail here is it's the 10th year of Dr. Manette's captivity in prison. He also is noting that his reason is starting to become impaired. He realizes that soon he will start to lose his mind from this long confinement. And so at this point, while he still has his right mind and his memory is still very clear, he's going to write the truth of what happened to lead up to his imprisonment. We have a date here. It's a cloudy moonlit night, the week of December 22nd in the year 1757. So he's going back 10 years to when he first sort of had this incident that eventually got him in trouble. He was walking on a quiet part along the Seine, about an hour away from where he lived in Paris during that time. He lived on the street of the School of Medicine. And as he's walking along the river, a carriage comes up behind him fast. The carriage stops, and two men are in that carriage that he notices are about his age, or maybe even a little younger. And they both look very much alike. One of them says, "You are Dr. Manette?" And he says, "Yes, I am." And they clarify to make sure that he is Dr. Manette, formerly of Beauvais, a young physician who is making a rising reputation in Paris. So Dr. Manette has a good reputation as a doctor who can be trusted. And Dr. Manette confirms that that's who he is. And they say, "Will you please enter the carriage?" They had gone to his residence first. He wasn't there. Someone told him he was probably walking in this direction. And so they've been looking for him. It says the manner of both was imperious. This could be a vocabulary word. It makes me think of the word imperial. Imperious means to be authoritative, in charge. Dr. Manette notices that they are armed, but he is not. Dr. Manette asks them to please explain the nature of the case to which he is summoned, because obviously that would be good for him to know. And they tell him, "Well, doctor, your clients are people of condition meaning status, nobility. As to the nature of the case, our confidence in your skill assures us that you'll be able to ascertain it for yourself. So we know you can figure it out when you get there. Would you please enter the carriage?" So he does enter it. They both enter after him, and then off they go to wherever they live. So they go through the North Barrier of Paris, and they go out into the countryside. When they get to this chateau, there's a reference that there's a neglected fountain that had overflowed. So it seems like this is a lovely home, but maybe it's not in the best, it's not being kept maybe as it should be. They pound on the door. The door is not open immediately, but when it is eventually opened by a doorman, one of these men strikes the man who opened it with his heavy riding glove across the face. And Dr. Manette says he doesn't really take any notice of that because people often struck their or hit their servants. But then the other man, when he also goes in, strikes the man in a worse way with his entire arm. And it's at this point, because I'm sure they're in the light a little bit, that Dr. Manette recognizes that these are twin brothers. So this is a good time to infer that these could be the Evermond brothers. Remember, Charles Darnay's uncle and his father. And his father had died, and the uncle had inherited the chateau, and then the uncle was killed in that chateau. That's who these two men are. So Dr. Manette is led up to the second floor to a bedroom, and he discovers that there's a patient up there crying and screaming, and she has a high fever of the brain lying on a bed. So brain fever at the time, and I have some notes about this here and also down here. A brain fever at the time was considered to be like an emotional illness, like that somebody has been so upset that their brain inflames and they eventually die. A brain fever, as we understand it today with modern medicine, would either have been meningitis or encephalitis. So meningitis is the inflammation of the tissue surrounding the brain, and encephalitis is inflammation inside the brain. Both of these are caused by viruses or bacteria. And during that time, I mean, it could have been any number of things that would have caused an illness like this. Herpes would certainly have been one of them, strep, contaminated water or food, or just illnesses. You know, there were all sorts of bacteria that came from, not living in clean environments. And of course, the peasants in particular lived in very, unhealthy environments. And just viruses. I mean, they didn't have a lot of medicine at that time. So it goes on to talk about how she is bound to the bed. So these two brothers have tied her to the bed. Her hair is torn and ragged. Her arms are bound on both sides with sashes and handkerchiefs, which Dr. Manette recognizes to be like clothes that belong to the men. They have basically used their clothes to tie her up. And there is a scarf that's tying part of her, and it has the letter E on it. So this confirms that it is the Evermonds. So while she's screaming out, she keeps yelling, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and then she counts to 12 and says, "Hush." So this is significant. We're going to find out why she's saying these words and why she's doing these things, but this could also be a quiz question, so I would definitely annotate that. And then Dr. Manette tries to figure out what all of that means, and he asks how long she's been sick like this, and they say that it's been about 24 hours. He decides to call the brothers, who are twins, the elder and the younger. Obviously, we don't know the order that they were born, but he's choosing to call one of the men the elder because he seems to be the one who's the most authoritative. But it's the younger, I'm pretty sure that we're going to discover was actually Charles Darnay's father. So he says it's been 24 hours. And so Dr. Manette tries to figure out what is the meaning of what she's saying, husband, father, brother. He asks, are you the brother? Looking at one of the brothers, and he says no, with contempt, because clearly he is a noble and she is a peasant. And Dr. Manette asks if she has any association with the number 12. And the younger brother says, this would be Darnay's father, 12 o'clock. Like he has no idea. So Dr. Manette says, keeping her hands upon her breast, "You can see how useless I am, as you have brought me. If he had known what he was coming to see, he could have come provided," meaning he could have brought some medicine. But of course, he has no medicine with him. And he says, "There are no medicines in this lonely place." And the older brother says, "Well, there is a case of medicines here." And he brings it from the closet. All the medicines are narcotics and just poisons. So none of this is going to be necessarily helpful to her actual illness. So the younger brother says, "What, do you doubt them?" And he realizes he's going to just have to make do with what they have. He just needs to do what they want him to do. And so he does give her a little bit of a narcotic, and it's basically just to calm her. And he sits there after he's given her a small amount of medicine to make sure that it doesn't hurt her. He notices that the house is damp and decayed, that it seems like it's rarely occupied and temporarily used, which implies maybe they have other residences, other places. And as they sit there and watch her slowly calming down, and he says he sits for the side of the bed for a half an hour. The two brothers are sitting there looking on. And then finally, the older brother says, there is another patient. And Dr. Manette says, is it a pressing case? And then he says, you'd better see. And it's interesting, too, that he says it carelessly. So he doesn't care at all about this other person. So the other person is in a back room, across a staircase, and through a loft over a stable. And they go up there, and he's laying on straw. There's references to dried apples and things, and just lots of hay and straw laying around. He can picture it even now, even though it's 10 years later. It's a boy who's laying on the ground. He's about 17 years old, a peasant boy, and he's laying on his back with his teeth set, and he has his hand over his breast, and he's glaring. He looks very upset. And Dr. Manette can see that he was dying of a wound from a sharp point. He tells the boy that he's a doctor. He'd like to examine the wound, and the boy says, I don't want to be examined, let it be. He finally calms the boy enough to take the boy's hand away and see that he has been stabbed by a sword. So only nobles have swords, so we can infer that one of these brothers stabbed him. He also recognizes that there's no way to save him at this point. He was at this point dying fast. The brothers look at him as if he's a wounded bird or a hare or a rabbit. They don't see him as a human. And this is just a reference to, how dehumanized the peasants were by the nobles. And he turns to the brothers and he says, how has this happened? How did this boy get stabbed? And the response from them is a crazed young common dog, is how they refer to this boy, that he forced my brother to draw upon him and has fallen by my brother's sword like a gentleman. So they blame the young boy for his own death, like he forced my brother to draw on him. And so he's dying because of his own, it's his own fault, basically, is what he's saying. No pity or sorrow at all. The boy's eyes had slowly moved to him as he had spoken, and they were now moving to me, Dr. Manette. And the boy says to Dr. Manette, these are proud people, these nobles, but we common dogs are proud too. Have you seen her, doctor? Referring to the young woman. And they can still hear her shrieking a little bit. And Dr. Manette says, I have seen her. And the boy says, she is my sister. These are important details. They have had their shameful rights, these nobles, in the modesty and virtue of our sisters many years. But we have had good girls among us, I know it, and I have heard my father say so. She was a good girl. She was betrothed to a good young man, too, a tenant of his. We were all tenants of his, that man who stands there. The other is his brother, the worst of a bad race. So what he's talking about is that the Marquis, who owns the chateau, would use the peasant women for his own sexual pleasure. And some of them would be willing and others would not. And he is saying his sister was a good girl. She would not have wanted to give herself to him. She was going to marry one of the other peasant men. And but that they've abused these women for years. So it's interesting to me, and I think a little bit unrealistic, that this dying boy can say so many words, but they're important words. So what Dickens is saying is that his desire to say these important details is keeping him alive, basically. So he says, we were so robbed by that man who stands there, as all we common dogs are by those superior beings, taxed by him without mercy, obliged to work for him without pay, obliged to grind our corn at his mill, obliged to feed scores of his tame birds on our wretched crops, and forbidden for our lives to keep a single tame bird of our own, pillaged and plundered to that degree that when we chanced to have a bit of meat. So this is referring to Charles's father, that to completely use all the peasants for himself. Whenever they had food, they ate it with fear because they were afraid if they were caught that the Marquis would take it away. He said what they prayed for most was that our women might be barren and our miserable race die out. So they hope that their women are infertile and cannot have children so that they don't have any more peasants in their family who have to suffer in this way. Dr. Manette notices, I had never before seen the sense of being oppressed bursting forth like a fire until I saw it in that dying boy. So this is a great example of what anger causes the revolution. Nevertheless, my sister married. He was ailing at that time, poor fellow. So the man that his sister married was also unhealthy, as peasants would be, and she married her lover that he might tend and comfort him in our cottage. So she marries him even though he's sick so that she can take care of him. He references their cottage as a dog hut because that's what the Marquis would call it. She had not been married many weeks when the man's brother saw her and admired her and asked that man to lend her to him. So they've just gotten married and the Marquis wants to have sex with her. He's basically saying, I'd like to have some time with your wife. Can I have her? And what's interesting is that the sister's husband is willing to give the Marquis his wife. What did the two then to persuade her husband to use his influence with her to make her willing? Because she hated the brother and she was good and virtuous and she did not want to have sex with him. But somehow she was convinced. So we don't know how she was convinced. Maybe it was because the man didn't want them to be punished. Her husband didn't want them to be punished more. Maybe he believed it was better to be subservient than to fight back for whatever reason. She is taken then for a long time. I mean, it doesn't say exactly how long, but Dr. Manette looks at those two Evermond brothers and sees that what he's saying is true. So he goes on to say, doctor, the young boy, the 17-year-old boy says, doctor, that it is among the rights of these nobles to harness us common dogs to carts and drive us. So he's being literal here. Like, they would put us on carts and make us work like the fields, like how an oxen or a horse would work. So they harnessed him and drove him. So they took his sister's husband, who was already sick, and they worked him like that, like as if he were an animal. That it is among their rights to keep us in their grounds all night, quieting the frogs in order that their noble sleep may not be disturbed. They kept him out in the unwholesome mist at night and ordered him back into his harness in the day. So they made him sit up all night in the cold and make sure that it was quiet outside. And then they made him work the next day like an animal without any sleep. So eventually, because of this overworking and the fact that he's already unwell, he dies. So it says he was not persuaded, taken out of harness one day at noon to feed, if he could find food, he sobbed 12 times, one for every stroke of the bell, and died on her bosom. So he died in the arms of his wife. So this is why she's counting to 12, because that's how many times he sobbed as the bell was ringing noon, and then he dies. And that's what the hush would stand for when she says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through the number 12 and then says hush. No, nothing human could have held life in that boy but his determination to tell all his wrong. He forced back the gathering shadows of death and continues to tell his story. He says, then with that man's permission and even with his aid, his brother took her away. In spite of what I know, she must have told his brother, and what that is will not be long unknown to you, doctor, if it is now. His brother took her away for his pleasure and diversion for a little while. So after the husband dies, they take her again. I saw her pass me on the road. When I took the tidings home, our father's heart burst. So the father also dies. So the brother goes and tells the father that the sister whose husband has just died has been taken by the Marquis into his home to be basically, his whore. And the father is so brokenhearted that he dies. So that's why she's calling out, my husband, my father, because they're both dead. And of course, the brother is also going to die because he's been stabbed. So She knows that these three men in her life are dead or about to die. So the room is darkening. The boy says that she heard me come in. He is determined to avenge the death of his sister's husband and their father. And so he comes in to kill the Marquis. And this is when Darnay's father stabs the brother. So this is the whole story of why we have a 17-year-old boy with a stab wound about to die, why we have a 20-ish young widow who's dying of encephalitis or meningitis from some illness, some viral or bacterial illness. It would not be inappropriate to assume that maybe she has caught some sort of, sexually transmitted disease here, or just is ill because of the way she's been kept. So in this telling, Darnay's father has left the room because clearly this is all the stuff that he did. So he's embarrassed, and so Dr. Manette is left with the boy and the uncle, and the boy props himself up and looks at the uncle, and he curses their family. Twice he put his hand to the wound in his breast, and with his forefinger drew a cross in the air. He stood for an instant with his finger yet raised, and as it dropped, he dropped with it, and then he died. So drawing a cross in the air is a curse on the family. So Dr. Manette goes back to the bed of the young woman. She is still, crying out, and she's still delirious from this fever. She's still saying, my husband, my father, my brother, all the way to 12, hush. So we know now what this means. And this whole state that she's going through lasts another 26 hours. So we've got like 2 days now that she's been sick with this fever, and Dr. Manette has come and gone twice to sit with her and to give her little bits of narcotics to try to keep her calm. Finally, the wind, it says, and the rain had lulled at last after a long and fearful storm. Remember, a lot of times in literature, rain is meant to be rebirth or cleansing, and we are going to be heading into her eventual death here. She finally slips into like a coma. So it's like she's dead, but she's not yet. The Marquis says, is she dead? And the doctor says, no, not yet, but she will die. And then this is an interesting quote. I could see this on a quote test, or it could just be a quiz question. The Marquis says, what strength there is in these common bodies. Like, he can't believe how strong they are. And Dr. Manette says, there is prodigious strength in sorrow and despair. So that comment makes the Marquis suspicious of Manette. He first laughs and then he frowns. And then he says, Doctor, finding my brother in this difficulty with these hinds, this will be the older brother, the uncle saying this, I recommend that your aid should be not spoken of. Like, you should not talk about what happened here. This should be secret because of who they are, obviously. And Dr. Manette avoids answering. And he says, do you honor me with your attention, doctor? And Dr. Manette says, Monsieur, in my profession, the communications of patients are always received in confidence. So, he's troubled in his mind, he says, with what he had heard. But the doctor's oath is that everything is private. You never would tell somebody about someone else's medical condition. So her breathing is so faint. There's barely a pulse there. There was life, but no more. And he sits there watching her, and the brothers stand there and watch him. Every time we have these little dots, this is a time when Dr. Manette has stopped writing and put his paper away, and then he comes back to it later when he feels like he's safe to write and nobody will know. He says it's with much difficulty that he writes. He's afraid of being detected and sent to an underground cell in total darkness. That would be to be sent to the dungeon. So he knows if he's caught writing, that's what could happen to him. This is an important detail. That young girl stays alive for a week in that coma-like state. Dr. Manette does try to talk to her. He tries to find out what her family name is, but she can't say anything, or she won't say anything. She's going to protect them. He does feel in a moment as if he were dying too. So this is just a moment of empathy. He realizes that, her death means more than just one person. This is an example of what the aristocracy is doing to all of society. There's a description here about the younger brother. I always observed that their pride bitterly resented the younger brothers, as I call him, having crossed swords with a peasant, and that peasant a boy. The only consideration that appeared to affect the mind of either of them was the consideration that this was highly degrading to the family and was ridiculous. As often as I caught the younger brother's eyes, their expression reminded me that he disliked me deeply for knowing what I knew from the boy. He was smoother and more polite to me than the elder, but I saw this. I also saw that I was an encumbrance in the mind of the elder too. So the elder is the uncle. The younger, smoother and more polite than the older, is Charles Darnay's father. My patient died 2 hours before midnight, at a time by my watch answering almost to the minute when I had first seen her. He's alone with her when her head droops to the side. Finally, the elder says, "Is she dead at last?" "She is dead." And then he says, "I congratulate you, my brother," is what he says to Charles Darnay's father. And then he offers money to Dr. Manette. He gave me a rouleau of gold, which is like a roll of gold coins. And Dr. Manette refuses to take it. He lays it on the table. He had resolved not to accept any money. And he says, "Pray excuse me, under the circumstances, no." This is a very vague thing to say. He's probably hoping that the brothers will interpret it that since this is supposed to be secret that I was here, it's better that I don't take money because there should be no history of this visit here. But also, personally, he's like, I don't want your money. You are disgusting people. So he leaves and heads home. The next morning, he finds that rouleau of gold at his door in a little box with his name on it. So they do give him money anyway. He decides that day that he's going to write privately to the minister, which means to the court, stating the nature of the two cases to which he had been summoned and where he had been summoned to. He's going to state all the circumstances. I knew what court influence was and what the immunities of the nobles were, and I expected that the matter would never be heard of, but I wished to relieve my own mind. I had kept the matter a profound secret even from my wife, and this too I resolved to state in my letter. I had no apprehension whatever of my real danger. So this is naive of him. He's literally going to tell the court in a letter what had happened at the Marquis's home. And he's also going to let the court know that even his wife doesn't know it. So he's really only giving this information to the court. Well, by the end of the day, someone has shown up. Someone's going to come and get him. But before he even sends the letter, there's an important detail. It's the last day of the year. So this would be December 31st. There's a letter lying before him that he's just completed. So this letter he's going to write to the court, he has just finished, and he's told that there's a lady outside who wishes to see him. So this is what's going to happen before he sends the letter. So the lady was the wife of the Marquis Saint Evremond. So this would have been Charles Darnay's mother. She comes in to say that she knows what kind of man her husband was. She knows about the woman who died and why she died. Her hope had been, she said, in great distress, to show that woman some sympathy. She had hoped to go and see her and just let her know that another woman cares about what she's suffering, because that wife knew that her husband was using that peasant woman for pleasure. She also recognizes that there was a young sister living, and her greatest desire was to help that sister. I think I may have left out a detail that one of the things that young brother said is that he took that younger sister away so that she wouldn't be taken by the Marquis. I can go back and show you where that is. But that's an important detail too in his whole story. So she knows that there's a young sister. She wishes to help that young sister. But of course, he is ignorant of where that young sister went because the boy only said that he took her away so that she wouldn't have to suffer the same fate as the older sister. So she is just very distressed by what her husband has done. Dr. Manette says that she was a good, compassionate lady and not happy in her marriage. The brother distrusted and disliked her. That would be the uncle, and was against her. And she was afraid of the uncle, and she was also afraid of her husband. When I handed her down to the door, there was a child, a pretty boy from 2 to 3 years old in her cottage, or in her carriage. So that would be young Charles. And she says, for his sake, I would do all I can to make what poor amends I can. He will never prosper in his inheritance otherwise. I have a presentiment that if no other innocent atonement is made for this, it will one day be required of him. So she believes there must be atoning for this terrible sin that her husband and the uncle have committed against these peasants. And she feels like if she doesn't do something good to atone for it, it will be required that Charles do something good for atoning for it. And he's just a little boy. This is also foreshadowing that it's going to be Charles's responsibility, which of course now he is the one suffering these consequences. So at the end of the day, so as soon as she has left, he does deliver the letter. And then at the end of the day, that night, the last night of the year at 9 o'clock, a man in a black dress rang at his gate. Ernest Defarge, his servant, a youth at that time, comes upstairs to get Dr. Manette. And he's sitting at that time with his wife. And the man in the black cape says that there's an urgent case on Rue Saint-Honoré. And so Dr. Manette goes out thinking that he's going to go attend to some other patient. And instead, a black muffler is drawn tightly over his mouth from behind. His arms are pinioned when they get to the carriage. 2 brothers cross the road from a dark corner and identify him. So these are the Evermond brothers. And the Marquis took from his pocket the letter I had written and sent to the court. So within the same day as Dr. Manette delivering that letter, it has gotten in the hands of the Marquis, and they have taken him and they have put him in the Bastille prison. So these are all the details that you need to know. There's quite a bit there. There's nothing wrong with doing a quick summary read on, another site or something just to sort of remind yourself. But I've gone through pretty much everything here that you need to understand, and bullet points would be helpful. Dr. Manette says also that these Evermond brothers are so evil because it never occurred to them in all the 10 years that he was in prison to at least let him know if his wife was alive or dead. That's what this reference is here. So he does believe them to be absolutely the worst kind of individuals. After this is read, so this is the end of the letter. After this letter is read, a terrible sound comes from the crowd, a sound of craving and eagerness that had nothing articulate in it but blood. The narrative called up the most revengeful passions of the time, and there was not a head in the nation but must have dropped before it. Little need in presence of that tribunal and that auditory to show how the Defarges had not made the paper public with the other captured Bastille memorials borne in procession, and they kept it biding their time. So they hung on to that letter knowing that at some point they might need it to sort of, seal the deal with the revolution. Little need to show that this detested family name had long been anathematized by Saint Antoine. I mean, they're literally making it clear here that the Evermonds were the worst of the nobles, that literally what happened at that home is what fueled the revolution. And all the worse for the doomed man that the denouncer was a well-known citizen, his own attached friend, the father of his wife. So they're the fact that Dr. Manette suffered all this, they're assuming that Dr. Manette will be happy to see his daughter made a widow and her child made an orphan, because there's no worse person than Charles Darnay. That's what the court and the crowd believes. And of course, that is not the case at all. Much influence around him has the doctor, murmured Madame Defarge, smiling to the vengeance. Save him now, my doctor, save him. So she knows, Madame Defarge knows, that the doctor's relationship with Charles Darnay means nothing now that they've exposed all the evil that Charles's father and uncle basically did to start the revolution, is what they're trying to say here. So the response to this from the jury is that every single one of them unanimously votes to put Charles to death. Everything is a roar. The jury members are roaring out their verdict. The crowd is roaring. And so they call Charles a notorious oppressor of the people. They send him back to the conciergerie, and that he will be put to death within 24 hours. So, by the curse of his family name, Charles Darnay is sentenced to death in 24 hours. I want to point out here that the use of the Darnay brothers as twins is another example of the motif of doubles. So there are doubles all throughout this book. The Evermond twins, Charles's father and his brother, are doubles. They look alike. They are also doubly evil. Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton also look alike, but they are doubles who are good. Charles Darnay is not evil. He is good. Sidney Carton is not evil. He is also good. He is flawed, as is Charles, but he is ultimately good. And the twin cities are similar. Paris and France, Paris and London are similar. Both places where there is great wealth and also great suffering and a tremendous amount of corruption, crime, and evil. We have opposing doubles. Lucy and Madame Defarge are two wives who have completely opposite characters. And then we also have, in the beginning of the book, the best of times and the worst of times, which is describing the fact that we do have in both these cities, in both London and in Paris, and honestly all around Europe, and even in the American continent, that we have the Industrial Revolution. We have things that are prosperous, things are changing, but also things are terribly, terribly corrupt. So definitely take your time catching all these details. I'm going to go back real quick and see if I can find you that spot where the boy talks about taking, it's right here. I know this, we have different pages probably, but it's right here when the boy is talking about all what happened. He says that after the father's heart burst and died, I took my younger sister, for I have another, to a place beyond the reach of this man. So he at least protects his younger sister so that she will not be abused by the Marquis. And that was that one detail I mentioned earlier that I've forgotten to tell you or point out to you. So hopefully you understand all this. You know, you're always welcome to pop questions in the comments too if there's anything that was not clear here.